All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Georgia Haddad, and I'm a senior manager on our public policy and stakeholder engagement team at the Partnership for Public Service. Thanks again for joining all of us this afternoon. For those of you who aren't familiar with the partnership, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit working to build a better government and a stronger democracy through policy advocacy work, through leadership development, workforce programming, and convening leaders across organizations and sectors. Today, we are super excited to be hosting this webinar on making time for what matters in government and in post-government life with an incredible panel of former feds who really understand the challenges that this community faces. I wanted to share a few notes before digging into the conversation today. Throughout the webinar, there will be two different ways to engage, and you should be able to see these. So look around your screen as I'm sharing this just to make sure that you know where everything is. There's a Q&A function, and that will serve to allow for an anonymous forum for you to submit questions without attribution, or comments for attribution as well, or without attribution as well, rather. Alternatively, you should see a chat function, and that will also be available throughout the session. And this way, if you want to pop in a question, a thought, or a flag for the group that can be seen by all other participants, you can use that. So there's an anonymous pathway and a pathway that allows for a little bit more engagement with the other participants of this session. Please make sure that you're comfortable with whatever your Zoom name is, whatever you've chosen, because that will be what's visible if you choose to use the chat function. All right. We know that in an hour, it might be difficult to get to questions, but if panelists have additional information, we'll be sure to pop it in the chat so that you can access them after the session, know where to learn more about what they do and some of the other resources that they offer. And additionally, we'll continue to hold FedSupport webinars like this if you're interested in a similar topic and maybe want to learn more in the future time, or maybe look at some of the things that we've done in the past. You can always find that information online as well. And we'll drop our FedSupport YouTube channel that will host this session afterwards, and then all of our other past sessions in the chat, as well as our FedSupport link more generally, which might be how you found us in the first place today. So to get us started, I'm very happy to introduce our moderator and author of the book launching this week, Sometimes You Should Be Late, a book about choosing how we move through time, Alex Snider. Alex spent 15 years in government before stepping away to pursue writing and facilitating important conversations, much like the one that we're going to have today. Though Alex's book has resonance across a wide variety of communities and situations, his experiences in government, along with those on the panel, have led him to understand that mindfulness can be kind of hard to come by in the environment of rapid demands that feds and former feds face every day in our current environment. So with that said, please join me in welcoming Alex Snider to kick us off. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Georgia, and the Partnership for Public Service for all the amazing work that you all do to make time for what matters. That's the title of our session today, and it's what my book's about. And before we kind of go into the content and the conversation that we're going to have with two of my friends, Robert and Mika, I just want to take a moment just to slow down with why we're all here. I'm going to share why I'm here, and it might be a nice opportunity to reflect on why you're here. As Georgia mentioned, I launched my book this week, my first book, and it's partially about public service, as Georgia mentioned, but it's also about remembering what our time is for. And that can be our career time. That can be time that we spend outside of our work hours. And it can be the things that we choose to do with our life. And for me, even though I left government last year, the decision to be intentional of having this conversation back within government, one of the first things I'm doing once the book out there, it really wasn't even a decision. It's something that just felt like it naturally needed to happen. Because for me, I don't want people just to buy this book, although I hope you do. I don't want people just to read the book, though I hope you do that too. I want it to be something that's lived. Something that we bring into the small decisions we make as we walk down the street and decide whether to say hi to someone or just walk by. how we treat our family and our friends in moments of stress and strain around time, and about how we work, what quality of attention and care we bring, not just to the goals we're trying to achieve, which in public service are pretty important, pretty high stakes, but bring our attention to the daily ways that we live our lives, the ways that we treat a colleague who's a little quiet and looking a little bit somber, the ways we treat the intern who's asking us for coffee and we're always too busy. Like that sort of is what this book is about. And so it's why I wanted to have this conversation about what it looks like in public service. So that's why I'm here. And so why the heck are you here? It's your lunch break. You might be on the clock. You have an email inbox that's filling, or maybe, if you're willing to fess up, you're probably checking during the webinar. Like you made a choice to be here. Maybe it's a curiosity, maybe it's to support me, maybe it's because you had nothing else to do and you went through all the content on Netflix and you're like, what else do I do? But there was a conscious choice. So maybe let's just take a breath with that. And eventually I'll ask Robert and Mika to share why you're here. Hmm. Actually, I'm kind of curious. Maybe I'll just set a little bit of context for where we're going for this next 50 minutes or so. And then I will ask Robert and Mika to share, why are you here? So what we're going to do is I'm going to share maybe 5 minutes or so just about the origins of the book, why I wrote it, a few things about what it says. And then I want to spend most of the time in conversation with Robert and Mika. And it's fun, this format where we can't see the participants. It feels like a nice little intimate conversation among friends that we do over coffee. So I'm very excited about that. And then I do want to spend some time engaging with what's alive, whether those are questions, contributions in the chat. And so there will be plenty of time for that. And on top of that, I wanted to also invite, as things come up, as you're contemplating on why you're here, of all the things you could be doing, feel free to use the chat, chime in, be part of the conversation. Um, Ideally, we all do this in person, and there's pros and cons of being on Zoom. But one thing that we can do is we can try to make it a bit more human, a bit more lived. And one of the great ways to do that is for the participants to share your voices and your ideas and your reactions, the things that feel really great and affirming, or that kind of feel weird and quizzical. And those are beautiful things to bring to. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mika first. Why the heck are you here?
Oh, why am I here, Alex? Thanks for, first of all, including me, and thanks for giving us pause to reflect on that question. I want to start first by saying I wanted to come and celebrate you and your accomplishment in this great book and the concepts that I deeply believe in and that resonate for me personally as well as professionally. So, as someone who served nearly her whole career, I've served in uniform as an active duty enlisted soldier in the United States Army, an active duty commissioned officer on active duty in the Army, and then throughout the federal government myself for many years, many decades, 7 different agencies before jumping over to private industry. My heart really does rest with those who serve, especially those who serve the public. And I know we're aligned in that way. And I just felt called to join the conversation and maybe open up some thought points around what might resonate strongly, especially for those who are serving in the federal government, in the military, and in other capacities. This might or may not resonate, but many of us feel so much pressure today to constantly prove value, especially now. Productivity, responsiveness, of course, relevance. But I think to Alex's point, as a result, we've accidentally started measuring contribution by speed instead of necessarily impact or time to connect, especially for those who we do serve. And so I'm seeing organizations everywhere really focus on the 3 Ps, performance, productivity, and sometimes the people. And I think it's out of order, to be honest, because those who we serve don't benefit because an email was answered in 3 minutes or because a report was cranked out immediately. They benefit from good decisions, good customer service and relationships, effective programs, sound stewardship. I'm sure Robert would agree with that. And trustworthy people and institutions. And in a yoga class a couple of weeks ago, I was reminded of this, and I put it in your LinkedIn post, I think it was yours, Alex, around this webinar. I was reminded that we take 22,000 on average, 22,000 breaths a day. And how many of those breaths are we deliberate about? Whether it's at work, with those we care about and want to support, like Alex, with our friends, with our teams, with our colleagues. So I just believe that speed is not necessarily the mission. I have to remind myself of that too. Believe me, guilty as charged. But service is the mission and connection is the mission.
Love that, Mika. So I'm hearing this desire to both serve me as a friend and also to serve the public in the way that you did for so long and in this new way. And I just noticed as you talked about how many breaths we take, it's a great reminder of me, and I felt myself more connected to it. So thank you for doing that. Robert, what about you? What inspired you to show up today?
Well, I was invited, first of all. And I'm touched and honored that you would have asked me to participate in this. I am a huge admirer of your courage. You have raised mindfulness in the bureaucratic context in a way that I've never seen. And because I have been on this mindfulness journey myself, it really struck me. And so I want to support you however I can. But I've also been on your book writing journey. You were kind enough to show me some early editions. And it, the fact that you've left government to take this on, just another example of your boundless courage. I, what you're doing by informing people they should slow down can have myriad impacts. The most important, Mika would agree, I think, is on the individual. Their personal health and well-being will be improved. But as a performance guy, selfishly, they'll perform better as people at work, as husbands, fathers, pardon my gender bias, and colleagues. And therefore, the way they serve the people, at least in the public sector context, is going to be even greater. You really can enhance your personal and organizational performance this way. And you're introducing it broadly, I understand, but since we interacted in the public sector context, you're introducing it to a place where it's just almost like putting a square peg in a round hole. But if you can fit it in there, then I think its impact will be significant. And the government's a very stressful place to work. I've been working in DC for almost 35 years, and people say, "Wow, it's been a crazy time." Like when has it not been a crazy time? I mean, when I landed, there was a government in the 90s. There was a government shutdown. There were blizzards. There was anthrax. There was 9/11. There were shootings in the Capitol. And the various election crises we've had over time, the economic crises we've been through, the pandemic. I mean, never a dull moment. So finding an opportunity to chill in the way you're instructing us, helping us, I think will have innumerous benefits.
Thanks, Robert. I just noticed I felt touched by the way you started that, and it's strange to have someone like name your courage, because the experience in the moment is often Yeah, it's not always clear, the balance of taking risks and
It's hard to say sometimes.
yeah,
Right?
and to feel you kind of
the-
reflect on that feels really special. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I'm also hearing sort of this beautiful like duality of on one hand, like let's care about the people, and also with your experience with performance, you're also really attuned to the fact that this is like if we care about government serving the people better, then this slowing down. It's not a tangent, it's not a digression from serving better. It is how we do it, especially in the sustained way you have to in government. So I really love that reminder. And just wanted to kind of potentially, you may be thinking like, oh, like when are we going to get to the content of this webinar? And we're doing this kind of slower introduction because this is the content, sort of our own reflection on why we're here, adding some context about like, what about this matters? Like, this is what we're doing. So next, I'm going to share a little bit about the book, its origins, kind of a little teaser of what's in it, and then we'll go into a conversation. So the book is called Sometimes You Should Be Late: The Quiet Rebellion of Slowing Down in a World Obsessed with Speed. And I want to maybe just start with that title. So the book is called Sometimes You Should Be Late, not always be late or never be late. And I emphasize that because ultimately this is a book about choice. It is not a takedown on productivity and hustle culture. It's not saying you should never answer an email after hours or that working on the weekend means you've like fallen victim to this like productivity culture. And it's also not a glamorizing of slowing down and not doing anything. It's really about aligning the way that we move through time with our values. And sometimes that will be showing up late, that will be taking a break, that will be going on vacation, that will be attuning to the number of different things that we need to do in our life. And sometimes that will be rededicating ourselves to our work and spending those extra hours and finding the cool productivity hack to like 2x your memo writing skills. Like that is also part of living a full life where our values align with the way that we're moving through time. Hmm. At the kickoff event last night that I hosted, one of the questions I asked the audience is what is time for? And that's a key thing that this book talks about in a lot of different ways. I talk about what it's like to wait for people. I talk about our own experiences in our bodies and in our minds of being late. And what I center around is time is a resource. Saying a meeting starts at 2 o'clock is a specific useful thing. Saying I will time block my schedule for my Tuesday is a useful tool to navigate time. And so some of the answers that came last night was time is for scheduling, time is for being productive, time is for optimizing and finding the way to accomplish what I want to. And those answers are all right. They're correct answers. And time is also for love. It's also for caring for a coworker. It's also for slowing down with someone who is having a hard time with change or someone who has a different opinion in a meeting. That is also what time is for. And in our modern world, our world, like my subtitle says, obsessed with speed, often the emphasis is on the deadline, how much we can get done, the new projects. And in the context of public service, very understandably, all the people that are in need of service, that depend on government. I spent 10 years as a diplomat, working mainly in West Africa at the State Department, and then 5 years working on management reform in both the Senate and then over at GSA, working with our colleagues in the White House. And that work really matters. And I had the amazing opportunity to work with so many dedicated public servants who knew that it mattered and who acted like it mattered. And I was going to say the word corrective. Is that the right word? I think the invitation that I want my book to offer everyone who's working in public service, as well as those in corporate suites across America, those who are working on nonprofits, and those who are doing other things with their time. The invitation is to be intentional and choose how we move through time. When does speed and productivity serve us? And where does it get in the way? Maybe I'll share a couple more words about just the origin of the book and why I decided to write it. And then I'm noticing I'm excited about getting into conversation with Robert and Mika, kind of specifically around some of those questions about how do we know when urgency serves us? And I think to Robert's point earlier, when is like it's always urgent? When is there never a crisis in government? Um, so I chose to write this book because two reasons. One, I have been writing publicly for a couple years now. As Robert mentioned, one of the things that I felt very drawn to do was to bring mindfulness and this slower, more intentional way of moving through the world to government. I was moved to do that, and I did it through writing. First, I did it through the teams I managed. I did it through kind of cross-government events that I could pull together, and I tried to bring that spirit into those. But I noticed there was a little bit of a ceiling to that. Only so much change across different agencies that I could affect with the things in my immediate orbit. And I knew through my work on Mindful Fed, a cross-government mindfulness community that I helped found, that there were pockets of people across government that really had this deep desire to move through time differently, to slow down because we care about our work, not in spite of caring for our work. So that led me to write publicly. And so an article I wrote called Sometimes You Should Be Late came out a couple years ago in Psychology Today. And it was one that received a lot of resonance and also criticism. I got lots of responses like, hey, like, how is being late kind? What's wrong with you? Like being punctual, like if you can't be on time, be 15 minutes early, like it's disrespectful. And so my response was maybe, and let's talk about it. And my hope is that this book is that conversation piece to have a nuanced conversation about that. And the second reason I wrote a book is because I decided that my time in government for now had come to a close. That with the current conditions that many federal employees are dealing with now, where I really wanted to step out and emphasize serving people, serving those who are the workforce that cares about these issues, I decided that this chapter had closed in government for me, and I wanted to widen it out to a larger sphere of how we move through time, not just in government but more broadly than that. And so for me, a book was a really good project, to have as I left government, and also a beautiful way for me to say, here's what I want to offer the world. Here are some ideas, and to lead into speaking, more writing, and to have that be a concrete offering. So that's why I wrote that book. All right, taking a breath and transition into conversation. So I want to start with Mika on this question. And you've done a lot of work in sort of the helping government agencies and individuals think about kind of wellness and sort of urgency and sort of like how do you going to bring those together? I'm curious kind of what have you learned about how do we make the case for slowing down? What have you seen as like the right way to say actually slowing down, caring for wellness is part of the mission for your team?
That's a great question. And all your reflections on why you wrote this book, Alex, just resonate so deeply with me. But I want to take a step maybe to the left of the workplace pieces. And I'm just going to talk about my experience as a mom of two Gen Z kids. Also navigating early careers, summer internships, education, this rapid adoption of technology that's going to make things faster, more productive, efficient, and all of the things. And I find that as a mom, which I can apply to the workplace, the greatest challenge for me has been in coaching them, these children who are watching all of the adults around them, the workplace grow, adopt, evolve, accelerate, the demands in school and elsewhere, extracurriculars, being excellent in every single last thing that they do. The greatest challenge as a mother, which is the number one job for me, by the way, and I see the lens and apply it and adapt it to the workplace and everything that I do. It's been like a pilot project for me to bring it in, but is to coach them in making time to enjoy time. And what are the tools for them to be able to pause and reflect and think deeply about where they fit in the world? What brings them joy? How can they leverage their skills and abilities? Is it okay to be a little lazy now and then? It is. Can you schedule time to not be so overscheduled? And my own children, and I'm seeing this play out in the workplace each and every day with the leaders that I work with, both in private industry, in the public sector, in nonprofit, in academia, workplaces everywhere are expecting more and demanding more. Hey, as a business owner, we want to 10x everything. If you did 10x last year, you got to 10x it again. I mean, when is it enough? It is so much pressure out there. So I'd like to invite us all to think about maybe reverse engineering that question around what is the greatest risk if we don't slow down? Sometimes, to Alex's point, not all the time, not none of the time, sometimes. And for me, how I see this play out in the workplace with leaders, with individual contributors, and especially our early careers, those that are looking to the left and the right of them and ahead of them in terms of what does the workplace have to offer me? How do I need to show up in today's workplace? How am I competitive? How do I get ahead? Is that if we do not slow down at times, we're at risk for burnout, which can result in mistakes, prolonged medical conditions, real physical health implications. The World Health Organization has categorized workplace burnout as an occupational syndrome as a result of unmanaged workplace stress. This reduces sound judgment. It narrows your perspective. It limits psychological safety on teams, which means people just don't have the bandwidth to raise their hand, speak up, take risks, poke holes in something, all of the things that we want in an innovative, thriving, healthy, productive workplace.
I love that, Mika. I kind of want to, I noticing myself wanting to slow down right here with something that for me just indicates how ingrained these patterns are. So after I'd finished sort of describing the book, my mind had shifted to, okay, now I need to have like a thoughtful question to kick it off.
Oh,
And I think all I needed to say was like, hey, what's alive for you?
what comes to
And I
mind?
love like Mika, you had sort of the flexibility in that moment to sort of on one hand notice that there was a question being asked of you, but to sort of, make a conscious choice and to sort of name you wanted to step outside of that and actually share something more human, more about your life, about those pressures. And I just really wanted to like notice like the skillfulness in that and how like these are the patterns we have of like going forward and like I need to have the question, I need to do this thing,
Mm.
to simply saying like, hey, like I've got thoughtful people here. Like, yeah, what's here? How does that resonate with you, Mika?
Well, what you're pointing out is also a skill that isn't taught very frequently. Because in our workplaces, we're taught to go fast, and time is a metric, right? The goals are time bound, they're meant to be specific and timely. And so I think if we don't teach the skill of the power of the pause, asking questions differently, like you just mentioned, what's coming to mind? Not, I'm in a town hall. I don't know how many of you have been in a town hall where someone's announcing, maybe it's the director of the agency or one of your political appointees, and they're announcing a new priority, a new initiative. All right, does anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay, let's move on. And the assumption is that everyone is on the same page rather than demonstrating a really mindful pause for people to take time to digest the information, think about the questions that they have, come back with innovative, maybe risks that they would flag for you. Who wouldn't want that as a leader when you're
Yeah.
announcing
That's such a
something?
fun example, Mika. And I sort of, it's the difference between saying, okay, like I've told you what we're doing. Like, are there any like technical questions about how we're doing it to the more relational, like, what does that feel like? And like, is there anything like difficult about that? Or what's scary about that? What's exciting about that? It's very different than just saying like, do you have any questions?
Very, very different.
Yeah. So I'm noticing I want to get Robert's voice in here, and I think honoring sort of like where Mika brought us to is just with what's been said so far, what's alive for you?
So I'm hearing Mika talk about the importance of teaching her kids this, helping her kids exercise this mindfulness muscle. And I had the opposite. It's really like, I needed to be a better father, um, a little high strung, um, my career being more important than other things and overreacting often. And as I became more chill in my life, my girls sort of saw that. And, I was a much better father, number one. Their lives were more pleasant. But it also uh, got positive reinforcement from my colleagues. So it is, I think we're all on a different time schedule. But I think, one of the important benefits of your book is that it's just another side of this prism of trying to reinforce how important this is. It is not a nice to have. It's not introducing it into the professional context. I really do think is going to take a lot of change management. We can be a lot more deliberate. I don't want to rush you, but I really think advertising the benefits is incumbent on those of us who have seen the benefits. And I can't state enough that the science behind this, as a rigorous evidence guy, the science is pretty strong that this can have all kind of benefits. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I love that, Robert. I think it's interesting that you notice um, you have this awareness for the people in your life that are giving you positive feedback, that are noticing how you move through the world differently, your family and colleagues. And I think that is a really important part of this process of trying to bring a new pace to the way that we work, the way that we live, is to actually slow down enough to notice how it's affecting the quality of relationships. And I think that's important for two reasons. One, because it's not always obvious. The normal sort of feedback in terms of like, I worked really hard and I accomplished these 12 things, and it feels very concrete, it's very linear. And, if we judge our progress on how quickly we respond to emails or, inbox zero or whatnot, then that's an easier to measure thing, but it's also maybe not quite as useful.
But I want to respond to that um, because it's ironic that if you are rushed and don't take time to slow down or reflect, your productivity will be less than if you were more mindful about it, if you actually took those breaks. And to Mika's point, you'll make fewer mistakes if you come at things from a more mindful perspective. So
Yeah.
it's very as a small business owner, as someone who helps organizations improve their performance, it really is a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I see you want to jump in, Mika. There's one thing I just wanted to say on top of that too is like I think it's really important. You talk about the science behind this. You talk about how it really is like ultimately the best way to achieve results is being intentional. I think that's true. And also you mentioned the word courage earlier. And I think it does take courage because if you're trying a new way of working and moving through time where you're spending time differently, you will get pushback. I got plenty of pushback. And so I don't want to give people the illusion that changing the way that you live your life with your family or your work is going to be like puppies and sunshine and rainbows, and everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, you're so mindful and great. I love this. Some people are going to say, why are you wasting your time and my time in these meetings by doing like a breathing exercise? Some people are going to say like, hey, I needed that thing like 30 minutes ago. What's wrong with you? And so there is going to be some feedback in the system that's mixed. And that's why this process of remembering why we slow down. It's not, and I'm actually going to segue, no, I'm not going to do it right now. But why we slow down, why it's important is so important, because sometimes you'll get feedback that's going to say, that's great, you're doing your job perfectly well by slowing down and being intentional. And sometimes you will not get that kind of feedback. And so to collectively remember that slowing down, being intentional, being mindful is a tool that we believe in, even when the immediate feedback in the system is not going to be affirming. Like that is a powerful thing to do, that our own kind of dignity. In the book, I talk about this concept in a chapter on authentic lateness. And I call this concept standing behind your clock, standing behind the values when people around you, when maybe your boss is pushing down this hyper urgency, and you have a choice about, do you absorb that and push it onto your team? Or do you find some way to creatively have a conversation and push back and have that nuance there? So I just wanted to add that in too.
I'm so
Mika.
glad you put that in your book, Alex. And I can piggyback on both of your comments too. Also, Robert, thanks for jumping in on the analogy around parenting. I mean, because if you care for someone, even if you're not a parent, roles roles that you play outside of work are often more important than the ones you play at work. But we place such an importance and urgency on time in the workplace. And I just want to I think, foot stomp what both Alex and Robert were mentioning, which is the people that we care most deeply about, that we work most frequently with, that we count on most of all, sometimes can mirror not just our positive energy, but often that stressful, negative, frantic, panicky energy even more. And so, as leaders in the workplace, especially in the public sector, teams will mirror your sense of urgency and panic. Imagine this. Have you ever been in an environment or a situation where your boss is super stressed out? You walk into a meeting and you know they are frazzled. She's frazzled. She's not in a good mood. Uh-oh, this meeting is not going to go well. Immediately, without even speaking, that sense, that you get a spidey sense, it's going to signal to you maybe something's wrong. Maybe something I did is stressing my boss out or didn't do. What am I doing that's contributing to this stressful environment or this sense of urgency or this panic that I'm experiencing? So, as leaders, it's really important to remember that our teams do mirror what and how we do it. And in the public sector, that matters most of all, because you can say there's this thing called the say-do gap, right? When there's such a high level and frequency of change and uncertainty, which every workplace is experiencing in today's world of work. But that say-do gap, that thing that where you hear people say, we care about our people, but hurry up, get it done. Oh no, you're late. We got to do things quicker, faster, with less. There's a gap there, and it really does affect how teams perform, how people perform, and we take that home to
I
the
love
very
that,
people
Mika.
that we
And
love.
I want to actually invite Robert to see what he has
Yeah.
around that, because I think what you mentioned is so important. It's not just the words you say, it's what you model. And ultimately, this book is about, it's not about changing organizations through some new strategy for organizational development. It's about how we can shift our own patterns and routines and perspective because it matters for us and because it helps shapes the cultures that we're part of by virtue of our behavior. And so I'm curious to hear, Robert, for you. I mean, you have this mindful background yourself. You've been a leader at the highest levels of sort of OMB. I'm curious for you, like what you've noticed and sort of how leaders like yourself can create these conditions where people have permission, are encouraged, are incentivized to slow down. What have you seen there?
I don't want to suggest that I'm there yet. It, it's I'm an evolving human being late in my life and career. Not that late. It's not. The I remember my time at OMB, um, and I joined in the early days the George W. Bush administration, I'd come from the House and so going from the House of Representatives to the Senate is like, going from, Olympic speed to being in quicksand. It's a fascinating phenomenon. It's not that they're more mindful in the Senate, although they'd like you to believe that. It's just a much slower pace. And then going to the White House, the pace was relentless, especially in the early days of the George W. Bush administration. But I got a boss, Clay Johnson, who had deep experience in the private and public sector. And he gave us all permission to enjoy work-life balance by articulating that we should be able to get our work done in a regular business day. And there were very few cases in which there was a government management emergency that needed to be dealt with after hours. Now, not everybody in the ecosystem got the memo, but at least the bubble he created for us gave us at least permission to not be so harried. But then joining the private sector and the profit motivation was relentless. And if you didn't contribute your fair share, then you were shown the door. And I saw varying degrees of leadership. But at Grant Thornton, where I was, they undertook an effort to strengthen the culture of the organization, to transform the culture of the organization. So I actually saw this organism that had some bad traits evolve in an incredibly positive direction by taking the leadership intentionally through what values the organization was going to have and how the leadership was responsible for leading its people through that journey. And that's actually what introduced all of this to me. But like I say, still on the journey, it's still a struggle. And my little growing business, puts pressure on the ability to take time. But again, if you remind yourself that it's going to improve rather than deteriorate your performance, then you got to make time. And so I hope that answers your question, Alex.
Yeah, I really love those examples, Robert, and kind of taking it from the high stakes, high stress corridors of government, and then also naming the private sector has its own pressures.
Yeah.
And this panel is called Beyond Urgency, making time for what matters, because there is pressure, and that can be the pressure of impressing a new boss. That can be a time window to get a policy through. That can be there's a State of the Union speech, you want to get something in there. All number of pressures that we face in
You're triggering me, Alex. So I need to maybe we take a break here.
Q4 deadlines, Robert. So those things are there, and it's part of the experience of being in any place where we care about outcomes. And I want to transition maybe to the question in the chat and also take this as an opportunity to invite comments, chat, Q&A. And the question is about sort of someone is sharing about kind of the tyranny of productivity, noticing how that was bad for their health, and then shifting towards retirement and noticing the value for rest. And the question specifically is around strategies for new habits. And I love this adding on at the end and still feeling like I have purpose. And it's a really beautiful balance there of wanting to slow down, but also to recognize that achieving things, doing things is a beautiful part of a full life. And so I'll be curious, Meek and Robert, what you have to share around that question. I think specifically what I want to share with my own personal journey of transitioning out of government. And I want to reiterate kind of what I see as like the core idea of this book is that slowing down is not the goal. Slowing down gives us choice. And so the simple act of moving towards retirement, being in retirement, And then taking a pause long enough to think about, like, how do I want to spend my time? Not just doing something frantically because we can't stand the idea of not being productive. But slowing down and asking the question is, what would make you feel like you have purpose now? What is the way to continue that journey of serving the public, but in a different way in retirement? What are the ways of expressing parts of yourself that maybe didn't have full time to be expressed when you were a public servant? And so I think my offering there is finding time and space in your life to actually like ask those questions, to journal about them, to talk about them with a partner, with friends, and notice how the value of rest is so important for you. And I I could imagine that becoming part of your purpose is having space for rest, noticing that. I think that's kind of like where I'd start. I'm curious, Mika and Robert, especially when you transitioned out of government and had a decision about what to do with your time. I'm curious what comes up for you with that question.
Robert, you want to go first?
You go ahead, Mika. Yeah.
Okay. Um, leaving government service was not an easy decision. Leaving military service was not an easy decision. I've had a lot of transitions in my life, and I think fortunately, Alex, I to some degree have had like the privilege to be able to make some of those choices, and other choices maybe I had to make a little prematurely before I was ready to. But some of the ways that I feel like I was okay in those spaces where things might have felt a little out of control or was uncertain about what it was going to look like on the other side of service was really getting grounded around that question of how do I want to spend my time? How do I want to manage my energy? What do I want to put to use in the world in terms of my strengths and what I feel like are gifts to give back to other people, other workplaces, other leaders, other parents who might be struggling, who might be really trying to do the right thing, but just don't have the tools to do it. So when I left a job that I absolutely loved, by the way, to make the really hard decision of gifting myself what I called an early retirement, I did not have the age to retire. In fact, I still have 10 more years before I can get it. So let's hope OPM's modernization and retirement works well when I go and cash out on my 24 years of service. I wanted to just really decide in terms of being able to manage my time and energy and purpose. And that required a little thinking about what it is I want to do with my time, as I mentioned, and the work that I do. So I created a business around doing more of what I love, doing more of who I love to work with and who I love to service. And it was also in service of those who I care deeply about. So my kids that I mentioned, I was coming to the end of, I call it was a sunset tour of them being under my roof full time. And I wanted to have the choice in having the ability to be there when I wanted to be, not being in a meeting when I didn't want to be, and being able to do more of the work that I love and bringing really great tools to the workplace.
I love that. So just to kind of like what felt alive for me in that is one, like deciding what your time is for and really being intentional about that. And then I also hear you like really honoring like not just what you want to do, but I love you framed it like who you want to work with and who you want to spend time with as like a way to be intentional about that.
Yes, because I think if you have the ability to have a choice now, whether that be retirement, whether that be taking an early DRP, whether that's transitioning to another job that you find more fulfilling, um, what are the things that you can control and why and for what purpose are you making those decisions? Now, I want to say one quick thing before kicking it over to Robert, and that is please do not believe that I have it all figured out. I don't. And as a business owner, there are many days where I'm ending up working constantly around the clock and thinking, this is not what I did this for. But I am choosing to do the work that I love, and then I try to recalibrate. So it's a constant evolution. I also really believe in peer-to-peer check-ins. So part of why I wanted to be here with Alex and Robert today is because I'll learn from them some tips and tools that I can put into my own practice. And I hope y'all will too.
Yeah, really feeling that kind of humility and that we're all on this journey of learning how to navigate it.
Yeah, speaking of humble, that was so beautifully put. I'm humbled to actually contribute afterward. My where I am currently is a happenstance that's different than yours. I left government in 2008. I went to the private sector, and that was an enormous challenge. But I had great support in the organization. But my business was purchased by another firm that didn't think I was as talented as I thought I was. And so I had to go and figure out how to make a living, and ended up starting my own business, which is not something I ever thought I would have the courage to do. So maybe this forcing mechanism brought it to be. Um, but talk about stress. I've never had my own phone. I had never purchased my own personal phone. It was either a government phone or my company phone. And then transferring all of your data. These were the stresses of my life at the time. But having greater agency over what you do, who you serve, what you do with your time is really empowering. And I would encourage people to consider that avenue if they're not working directly through these institutions, because it's got its own stresses. So to Mika's point, don't think that this is all Zen. And bringing on employees is a stress, and making sure that those folks remain healthy and rewarded by the work is a new challenge that this conversation helps with. So that's that's how I've gotten to where I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like this acknowledgement of, like the way that I heard it was a kind of a grass is greener thing of like, if only I worked in this different world, then things would be less stress. And that can even apply to retirement.
Yeah.
Well, once I retire, my life will have no stress at all. And then like family drama and, travel delays and like your like new book club has a feud over some book that no one wanted to read. There's like, like this is part of life and it's going to follow us. And that's part of why what we're trying to model in this conversation is slowness and intentionality, because that also is going to follow us. And I think that's the hopeful upside of cultivating a way of living our lives that is, yeah, where we lead with our intentions and our values and what we care about. And we trust that that will be received and that will support us. And because that intention, that value is going to follow us too, just as much as the stress. I'm just noticing our time, and I want to maybe make an attempt of kind of taking us into a landing with some kind of practical takeaways based on kind of what we've shared and trying to encapsulate that. And I'm going to do a quite imperfect job at that. And I'm going to ask for Robert and Mika to maybe help me across the finish line there. But kind of one of these takeaways, sort of, especially Robert, you hit on this, is really like remembering the costs of speed, the cost of efficiency, and coming back into sort of the power of slowing down to really clarify what matters, to remember that this is actually the way towards long-term productivity, towards long-term efficiency, those words that we love. It's ultimately slowing down, being more mindful is a key pathway towards that. A second one, which goes into a little bit of what we were just talking about in terms of career transitions, is kind of creating some space, creating some pauses before major life transitions. In the book, I talk about this in the chapter on slow down when you're late, of how like when we're in this moment of transition, whether it's starting a new business, leaving, there's a tendency to want to like speed up and like, okay, now I need to look at all my options and I need to like have 3 separate life coaches to figure this out. And those are also moments to slow down and to remember what matters. And like Mika said, like not just what you want to do with your time, but who you want to spend time with. And the third one, and I think with this one, I may want to open it up to Robert and Mika for maybe some kind of final words on this, is I have a chapter called The Kindness Buffer about when we leave space and time in our lives. It's not empty time, it's not blank time, it's time to live our values. And so in workplaces, when we have extra time between meetings and deadlines and projects, that's time to say hello to a coworker. That's time to ask someone about how they're doing after their divorce. That's time to check in on your colleague's daughter's softball tournament. And so like when we have buffer, when we build in extra time and do a little bit less, it's creating the conditions for us to be with our values more fully. And so those three kind of takeaways, the cost, the speed are there. We have to recognize them and see the benefits of slowing down, creating pauses before major life decisions, and creating a little bit of buffer, a little bit of space in your life, not so you can get the places on time, but so you can live a life that's more aligned with your values. So maybe kind of Robert, Mika, sort of any reflections on that as we kind of move towards a close together?
I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious, meditate, learn how to breathe, take deep breaths. You know, superior athletes know how to regain their concentration through breathing in really short periods of time, so it need not be laborious. And then I write. Take time to reflect on what's in my head, so that it can be actually processed. So those are three very hopefully practical suggestions.
Yeah, and just adding some context to that, those are all practices of kind of slowing down with our bodies and our minds. I'm sure many people who are listening have, journaling practices or gratitude practices with partners, or meditation is a word that can be a bit charged of like, oh God, I need to do that, I'm doing it wrong. But going on a walk and not bringing your phone, or actually spending time with your kids without like that, it can be its own form of slowing down. So thank you. Mika.
Well, I'm just gonna talk from my heart in terms of what's coming to mind, and that is those of us who serve public service, military service, service adjacent in industry. It's always been about creating value for people rather than hurry up, let's go. But we forget that. So I think the challenge is that sometimes you should be late is really about making better use of the moments that we already have, including some of those 22,000 breaths that I started talking about in the beginning. So it could be just a pause for some deep breathing. Nobody even has to know when you're at your desk or in the boardroom. It could be taking a walk and getting some sunshine on your face. It could be just listening to your favorite song. There's neuroscience behind that. It could be connecting with wonderful friends who are celebrating a wonderful book and bringing it to you as a gift. So thanks for having me, Alex, and congratulations again. Thanks, Robert, for all your insights.
Thanks, Mika. I think that's a perfect place to sort of slow things down and end slowly. And I think the last thing I want to say is, we've thanked each other for being here. And I think it's important just to thank one more time public servants who are working in difficult conditions. I don't need to tell you, difficult conditions, and still trying to serve the public as best they can. And it's such a gift. And my hope is that this book helps you feel affirmed and cared for in the fullest sense of yourself, and that caring for yourself is actually going to serve the public. So thank you so much. Georgia, I'll pass it over to you to close this out.
Thank you. Just again, before we wrap up, thank you, Alex, Mika, Robert, for your contributions, for your time, for sharing your expertise and wisdom with all of us, and for everybody who joined today. Like Alex said, we know there's a lot going on for everybody at a lot of different levels. So thank you for your time. Given that we're about a minute out, we're going to pop up a poll. If you've got a few seconds to just take the poll, it always helps us know if you have any feedback for us as we have sessions like this in the future. If you just want us to know what you thought about this one, to help us make sure that we're always meeting you where you are, providing resources that are helpful. We appreciate your time there. So you should see that on the screen. Please feel free to visit FedSupport, which is our website for resources like this and others from our partners. I know that there's a bunch of things in the chat, the FedSupport Hub, the YouTube channel where you can see this session in the future if you want to watch back. Maybe you missed something, maybe you want to share it with somebody. You've seen where you can check out the book. You've seen Robert's site, Mika's site, everything's there in the chat, and we'll follow up with an email after this as well. But before I hand it back to Alex for some closing words, again, just want to thank you all for your time, for your service, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, Georgia. And thank you so much, Natalie, on the back end, who's making all this magic happen. Thank you. The last thing I want to say is maybe just add one more piece of context, and I'm going to put another link in the chat, and forgive me, Natalie, for doing it on my own. I'd love for you to buy my book. Like I said, I'd love for you to read my book. And also, I want these ideas to spread. And so I am offering my book on a pay, thank you, Robert, love that, on a pay what you can / free, available for anyone who wants it. That's not as like a bait and switch tactic. It's because I want people who are interested in these ideas to have access to them. And so I put that link in the chat too, because what is public service about? It's about believing in something bigger than yourself. It's about looking beyond your paycheck. It's beyond looking beyond just what your individual fiefdom of an agency or a department can do, but about seeing the larger why behind this. And I'm lucky to be joined by 3 people on my screen now who are mentors for me in terms of like thinking about how we slow down and remember what matters. And we're in this together. And public service is this practice of being in it together. And so I think the way to end this is to remember that we are so deeply interdependent. And this title of like going beyond urgency to see what actually matters, to see what time is for, it's something that we can each practice a bit on our own. We can build these habits into our lives. We can practice them in our family lives, in our community lives, in our workplaces. And ultimately, we need each other to help affirm that this matters, to help affirm that the way that we serve the public is not by rushing frantically and burning ourselves out because our work matters. It's by slowing down and caring for ourselves and for one another because our work matters. And if we don't sustain ourselves as teams, as individuals, then ultimately the people we're letting down are the public. Take a breath. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Mika, to Robert, to Georgia, to Natalie.